they asked if I wanted to jam with them. So I was like, sure, let's get together and jam. And we set up a time. And I think our first rehearsals might have been in Tacoma where Chris was living at the time. And so we had a really good jam. It was really fun. They were like, oh, what do you think? I said, oh, it was pretty fun. I really enjoyed it. And they're like, cool. Would you want to come back and jam again? Sure. And that's kind of how it went. It just like it was coming back and jamming. And I never recall a point where it was like, okay, you're officially in the band. It was more like, let's just keep jamming. And so I kind of ended up in the band.
Welcome to The Creative Asylum, a weekly podcast that digs deep into the minds of visionary creators of all stripes. Musicians, actors, filmmakers, writers, artists, cartoonists, and cultural disruptors. Here, we'll discuss perspectives of living life on your own terms. Life lessons that keep us grounded and sane, and sometimes pull us back from the edge. So, take a deep breath, loosen your grip on the bland and the boring. This is your weekly prescription for authentic living, creative clarity, and hopefully, a little bit of cultural rebellion.
Side effects may include spontaneous joy, existential epiphanies, and an uncontrollable urge to do weird and beautiful things.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Creative Asylum. I'm your host, Daniel House, and today's guest is an old friend, Chad Channing. He's the original drummer for the band Nirvana. He's on their very first full-length record, a record called Bleach. He was the drummer before Dave Grohl, departed the band in 1990, but he's been musically active ever since in the decades between then and now. He was in a band called the Fire Ants. He was in another band called Before Cars, and his current outfit, which is just a two-piece, is called Can of Clouds. We talk mostly about Nirvana, because that's probably what most of you all want to hear, but, we just kind of touch on a lot of things as the old friends that we are, and we get to talk a little bit about these more recent bands since, and kind of what his life is looking like as he's moving forward. So thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Here we go. Chad Channing. Hello, Chad. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, Daniel. Doing well.
That's good. Thank you for coming on and doing this with me.
Yeah, you bet.
You and I have known each other an insanely long period of time, though we haven't seen each other in probably almost as long, I think. I've been gone from Seattle since 2003, and I know it was a long time before that.
Yeah.
I do know when we very, very first met. That was, I think, at least, that was the first time that Skinnyard and Nirvana shared a stage together.
Skid Row?
It was Squid Row. Squid Row, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, so we played 4 shows together, and I actually do want to ask you, like, if you have memories of any of these shows, because it was a long time ago. That Squid Row show was July of 1988, and it was just the two of us.
Right.
And I remember that was the first time I ever saw those, what were those drums called that you had?
Oh, the North drums. Yeah. The
North drums, yes.
Yeah,
That's the first time I ever saw one of those. I'm like, what are those? Those are wild, man.
Yeah.
So what do you remember from that night? Do you have any recollection? Long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I mean, and it was definitely one of Nirvana's, earlier shows. I mean, we played a handful of shows, but that was definitely one of the first ones. Well, I remember the Squid Row I don't recall it being a very big place. Like the stage seemed somewhat small, and maybe a foot above.
Oh, it wasn't even a foot.
Nothing that. Did it
was like 8 inches up, and
oh yeah,
the size of a large piece of toast.
Yeah.
It was tiny. Yeah.
Yeah. It was.
And those North drums took up a lot of space.
Yeah.
And then you had Chris, who's like, 7 feet tall.
Bouncing his head off the ceiling, probably.
Almost. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That show, that the first time seeing you guys was like really cool. It was just like, I really kind of enjoyed the whole scene of everything that was going on. And, watching, like, Jack play for the first time, and it's kind of
Mhm.
he has that sort of look. I can't put it into words, but it's just sort of it's just it's this or something, but,
There's something going on.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. I remember my first exposure to Nirvana was, I don't know, 2 or 3 months before that. Jack had just recorded that first demo with Dale Crover,
Right.
and we had practice. We were getting ready to play, and Jack was like, just play. I'm not even gonna try to do my Jack and Dion impression because it's terrible. But it was basically like, "I just recorded this band over this weekend, and you gotta hear it. They're amazing." And so we're like, "Okay." And he put the tape on, and we just sat there listening. I think we listened to, like, 4 songs, and by the end, we're just like, "The
Yeah.
fuck?" And I think we all collectively sort of felt like imposter syndrome, because there was something about the songs and the energy and just the sort of purity of the way that, I don't know, those songs that Kurt wrote and the way he sang, and it was just like it was that same kind of Neil Young kind of, like, this is the real deal,
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
and you could tell it was just kind of organic, and we worked so hard at our craft. I'm like, "God damn," but the response was that, "Well, shit, we gotta ask these guys to play a show with us." And so, like 2 days later, I called Kurt up and said, "Hey, we've got the show coming up, do you wanna would you be interested in playing with us?" And I don't remember what the date was, but, like, you guys had a gig. You had something else going on, so you couldn't do it. So,
Right.
our next show was that show at Squid Row, and, I think that was I don't know, I think that was maybe your, like, 2nd or 3rd show in Seattle proper. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I felt it because I mean, like you said, when you'd heard that demo a couple months prior, of course, I
Yeah.
was yet to be in the band.
Right.
That demo tape was the tape that, Kurt and Chris had gave me, to, like, when they were courting me.
Uh-huh.
They gave me that tape, and I kinda had a very similar reaction, I that you were just talking about. I was like, "Well, damn, this is really cool." It's just like,
Yeah.
it was really well crafted in a very simple manner, where it
Yeah.
was sorta like the thing that was interesting to me. That kinda drew me in. It was just like it really was. It's like when you take it apart, it's, very simple, but when the pieces put together, then it became something, and it was yeah, I was just like, "Well, cool, I'm gonna give this a shot," but yeah, we might have only played, like, the Vogue and maybe the Central. That might have been the 2 shows before that Squid Row.
Right.
I think, yeah, because like I said, there wasn't many shows that we played, before that, so
I remember the visual of the band and the intensity of the music not quite meshing. I think because you were such a young band, and I remember there that's just like there was sort of an awkwardness, and I remember Kurt specifically looked really uncomfortable, like, he kept getting close to the mic, and it was almost like, "What is this thing I'm having to get close to?" or something, and then just, Chris being so tall and lanky seemed out of place, but then I would, like, close my eyes, and I'm like, "Damn, this is really good stuff." So how did that happen? Because, well, I guess what? Dale was just sort of filling in to do the demo, but since he was already doing Melvin's, wasn't really gonna be a part of the band proper.
Right, yeah, well, so Dale had done that. I was in a band, originally called Magnet Men, which then we changed our name to Tick Dolly Row, uh,
To what?
to Tick Dolly Row.
Okay.
It's a sailor's term kinda meaning down and out.
Uh-huh.
Ben Shepherd actually came up with it. He actually was the singer. Uh,
Oh, cool.
so he sang for us, and we had a show at the, Community World Theater in Tacoma,
Uh-huh. I
and
remember that place.
we had a show scheduled to play with a band called Bliss, which, of course, at the time just Nirvana under one of their pre-names,
Okay.
and so we opened for 'em. I watched them play. Kurt, I think he was wearing like these crushed velvet bell bottoms. I think they were either green or purple. I can't remember which.
Wow.
And yeah, it was, and then he had platform shoes on. And then
Really?
I think they were,
I
yeah,
can't picture this.
yeah, it was pretty wild. And Chris was, just really tall. And I believe the drummer at the time was I think it might have been Dave Foster. I'm
Hmm.
not
Okay.
100% on that because there was Aaron and then Dave, but Dave was actually the drummer in the band when I saw him, at another show later on,
Okay.
but Kurt, always like, "Man, when I saw you guys play, it's like those drums, those are so crazy drums. I just love those drums." He's all about the drums, big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You really love those. But I saw him and I was like, "What am I looking at? This is crazy." But it was really cool. It was very, it was loud and it was just a wall of noise and stuff. And the sound wasn't the greatest for some reason. I don't remember it being, so it was kind of hard to discern,
Right.
some of the song stuff. But anyway, after that show, my friend Damon Romero had come up to me and he said, "Hey, those guys are looking for a drummer."
That's
Uh,
so funny that you mentioned Damon Romero because I literally have him on a list of somebody I need to call.
oh yeah, yeah, we keep,
Like literally 2 days ago, I'm like, I gotta call Damon.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Anyway, that's something that's unrelated, but
Right, right, yeah. We keep in contact. We keep in contact a lot. Yeah,
he's a good
guy,
dude.
but
So was the first time that you met Kurt and Chris? Was that show?
it was that show, and
Okay.
then they invited me to come see him play, and I think it was on the Everman campus. I think it was an outdoor show, and Dave Foster was playing for him at that time, and I went and saw the show. Uh,
Still called Bliss at this point, or have they changed their name to Nirvana?
yeah, I think they were still called Bliss, and then, so I talked to them after the show, and so I had more of a, proper introduction, because I mean,
Mhm.
we did meet after the show at the Community World Theater, but there, they asked, if I would be interested in playing drums with them,
Mhm.
and actually they asked if I wanted to jam with them, so I was like, sure. I wasn't doing it at the time. I've To this day I have no idea what happened to Take Dolly Row or why it disbanded, but whatever, that wasn't happening at the time. And so I said, "Sure, let's get together and jam." And we set up a time, and I think our first rehearsals might have been in Tacoma, where Chris was living at the time. And so we had a really good jam. It was really fun. They were like, "Oh, what do you think?" I said, "Oh, it was pretty fun. I really enjoyed it." And they're like, "Cool. Would you want to come back and jam again?" Sure. And that's kind of how it went. It just like it was coming back and jamming, and I never recall a point where it was like, "Okay, you're officially in the band." It was more like, "Let's just keep jamming." And so I kinda ended up in the band.
So were you writing songs together, or did you start learning songs that were already written, or
Well, yeah, I mean, there were some songs that I was learning that they already had. "Downer" was one of them, Floyd the Barber, but there was also, new songs that were being written as well,
Right.
which, would call it.
Kurt was kind of always writing, as I recall. So I used to call Kurt at home when I was working at Sub Pop. I could always hear him strumming and just kind of messing around on his fretboard whenever I called him, like, while talking.
Mhm.
I always pictured him kind of draped over, like, an easy chair with, like, the phone cradle, like, on his shoulder while he had his guitar at the same time. Because
Yeah.
I could always hear both, very often a TV in the background as well, you know?
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And I was always trying to, like, "Okay, what are you playing? What are you playing?" I've kinda realized that he's somebody that just kind of came up with stuff often very easily, and again, made me feel like an imposter because I would work so hard at it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely one of those characters just sorta sit down. I mean, every time, most every time when we got together and jammed, it's like, he always had some, new riff.
Some idea, yeah,
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 exactly,
yeah.
some idea.
So
And
you just started jamming, and before you knew it, you were just in the band.
yeah, just in the band, and somebody had reached out to, Kurt and Chris, from Sub Pop. Well, I know that I believe Jack had given that demo that,
Mhm.
goes to Bruce and Jonathan.
Yeah, I
And
think you did.
so they had interest in us, and then they reached out to Kurt and Chris, and then, they said, "Yeah, so looks like"
Yeah, I think it was mostly Jonathan
was it
who
mostly Jonathan?
mhm.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
'Cause keep in mind, I was working there at that point.
Right,
So
right.
I was working at Sub Pop starting early '88 through late, 1990. I was there for about 2.5 years.
Right,
And,
right.
so, I was doing CZ Records, I was doing Skin Yard, I was at Sub Pop. My tastes typically kind of aligned a little more with Jonathan than Bruce. And then there was the occasional bands that they agreed on, but there weren't that many.
Interesting.
I mean, there were certain bands like Green River, full on agreement. Bruce originally wasn't that big on Soundgarden
Oh, okay.
because Chris just kind of wasn't his thing. It was a little too, I don't know what, not garagey enough or something,
Right, right. Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think they were both in Nirvana, but I think John's enthusiasm was like intense, and Bruce was like, yeah, they're good. But, and I remember actually when I was there, at one point there was, I think it was the first Mudhoney record, or maybe it was the first full length record, was coming out at about the same time as Bleach. And they were
Right.
putting all of their money and marketing into Mudhoney. And I was really trying to make a pitch to them saying, you're betting on the wrong band. I don't want you to take this wrong. It's not that I don't like Mudhoney. I do. I love them.
Yeah.
But I really think this other band, Nirvana, has the opportunity to get much, much, much bigger. And I remember being told, like Jonathan, I'm like, well, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're gonna, because keep in mind, at this point, Sub Pop did not have a lot of money to play with, right? So they had to kind of say, we have this little chunk, where do we put it? Because we can't spread it out.
Right.
And in the end, obviously, it all worked out, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
do you know the story about the Nirvana cassette? So first it was just vinyl,
Right.
and then later they released a cassette
Okay.
of Bleach. And in between, you remember there was that EP that came out of the UK, and there was 2 songs from Bleach on the Blue EP, right?
Yep.
So I'm actually kind of psyched that you've never heard this story, so I get to tell it to you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm have I
So
don't think I have.
Gary Held was the guy who ran the label over in the UK. The idea was that they're going to take 2 songs from Bleach, and then they were going to take 2 new songs to make this EP. Great. And then, that would help kind of seed the European market. I mean, good idea. So they called Jack up and they said, we need those 2 songs from Bleach so we can send them overseas. So he literally cut the songs from Bleach out of the master tape of Bleach, and they got sent over and they got sequenced as part of the Blue EP. And then later, as Bleach was really starting to explode and do incredibly well, the push from Caroline Distribution's like, hey, dude, we think you should put this out on cassette. This could do really well on cassette. And I was in charge of all the sales and I was in charge of all the distribution. And as part of the distribution process, I also, because we had a distribution deal at this point with Caroline, I had to get approval for the masters when they came in. So either Bruce and or John had to listen and go, yes, approved, right? And then we could say, go ahead, start pressing. So we got the cassette and I gave it to Jonathan. And I'm like, we have a deadline and you need to listen to it. You need to actually listen to it. Sit down and listen to it. It's like, I will. All right. But he's always on the phone. He's a little scattered. He's always doing 8,000 things.
Yeah.
And, 2 more days, like, dude, have you listened to it yet? No, I'll do it today. Next day. Have you listened to it? No. Okay, I'll go do it today. And finally, one day I'm like, dude, deadline is tomorrow. If we don't give them approval, the release is going to get pushed back. And I said, if you won't listen to it, I'm going to do it and I'm going to approve it or not approve it, whatever. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So he comes in and goes, okay, approved. He basically put on, played it, but he didn't really listen, didn't really pay attention. He was on the phone kind of while it was playing in the background. So I said, okay, we approved. We put in an order for, I think it was something like 50,000 cassettes, some crazy, crazy amount.
Wow.
We went out to the stores and then we started getting complaints because there was 2 songs missing from the cassette
Oh, geez.
because they used the tape with the 2 songs that had been pulled off and sent to the UK.
Wait. So you're saying this tape didn't have Then It's Understand?
The initial cassette release from Sub Pop
Yeah.
had Bleach minus the 2 songs that were on the Blue EP because they had literally been physically cut and sent.
No.
And so we had to do this massive recall notice. this is a perfect story of how I always say that Sub Pop was the label with 9 lives.
Yeah.
The number of returns that came back were minimal because people kept the cassettes because the anomaly made them a collector's item.
Oh, wow.
I might be wrong. It might have only been like 10,000 cassettes. I don't remember. But I was like, are you kidding me? That's just so weird. And so then they fixed it, and the future cassettes all had the proper full track
Right.
listing. But
Wow.
I was always just like,
What the
you know, any other label that could just like destroy them because it was, it was a significant cash outlay for, a label that was really small and cash strapped at that time.
right. I'm trying to think what were the 2 songs off Bleach they took, 'cause I don't remember.
I don't either. I could go look it
That's
up,
so
but
bizarre.
yeah,
Never heard
it
that
was,
before. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
it was a funny story.
That's crazy.
But Sub Pop collectible. Hey,
Yep.
Anyway, so the next show we played together was up in Bellingham at a place called Speedio Tubbs. It was you guys and Coffin Breaking Us, and everybody I've talked to about the show has virtually no memory other than kind of. I remember it was a small room, and I remember there weren't very many people there.
Currently, my profile picture on Facebook is a picture behind the drums,
Uh huh.
and you can see a little bit of Kurt in the picture. And from my understanding, that was actually taken at that show,
Really?
and that's the only thing that that I can really recall from that
Uh
show.
huh.
I was like, I kind of like put it out there. It's like, where was this picture taken? I kind of started digging around, and yeah, people started coming back. So that looks like Speedio Tubbs up in Bellingham. Speedio,
Okay.
people were saying that because whatever the background is, I guess, gives it away.
Right.
But it's a black and white. But yeah, so apparently that came from that show. I don't know
Huh.
who took the picture.
I mean, again, we're talking what 38 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's cobwebs. Yeah.
So the next show we played after that was a few months later in 1989, and this was a big deal show. This was the show with Skinyard and you guys and Girl Trouble and the Fluid
Yes. Yes.
at the Hub Ballroom
Yep.
at UC, and we were supposed to headline, and I think you were still opening at this point. And I remember we pulled a really dick move and well, I pulled a dick move. I think it was me. And made Girl Trouble go on last.
Oh.
And I remember they were really pissed. And, understandably, I suppose,
Yeah.
because sometimes, on a big bill, the last slot can kind of be a shitty slot because people are like, want to go home. It worked out great. Like, so it ended up being Nirvana, The Fluid, Skinyard, and then Girl Trouble. Everybody stayed. Every band that night was just totally kick ass, including Girl Trouble. And it worked out great. But do you remember that night?
I do. Yeah, I remember. I remember a bit of that show, and it's kind of funny because as time was progressing with everything that was going on, I mean, like the very first show that I recall, playing with Nirvana, there was like a handful of people, maybe 12 people, that including the bartender. And
Right.
so,
And the opening band, or
yeah,
you were the opening
yeah, yeah,
band
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah.
or the headline band?
Yeah. But I mean, by that point, I was thinking, well, the Hub Ballroom, I think, to me, that was probably the biggest place we'd played yet.
Mhm.
I think it was, there was a lot of people there,
It was packed. I
yeah,
think it was probably the biggest crowd we'd ever played in front of at that point as well.
yeah, exactly. And I remember just being completely excited. I was like, oh my god, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people here. This is crazy.
Yeah, it was
Hope
amazing.
we
It
don't
was
suck.
amazing. And it was like $5 or no, it was 4 bands, $4, I think,
Oh yeah,
which is
yeah, because
hard to even fathom now,
yeah,
right?
somewhere in my junk, I think I still have the flyer for that show.
Really? Yeah, I do. Well, you know what? It's if you're ever strapped for cash, it's probably worth some cash.
It could be, yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm assuming and I'm hoping that you still get residual money from Nirvana stuff
yeah, yeah.
all these decades later, which is great.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
still do. Still on the
and then
payrolls.
the last show we played together was the last show we ever played with our drummer at that time, which is Scott McCullum, who later played in Grunt Truck. That was after we'd come back from our tour from hell, and it was Green River Community College. And that was the point at which it was really, really apparent that Nirvana had completely eclipsed us. Everybody was there for you guys. And I remember the show was just like, oh fuck, because you guys just destroyed. It was one of those just like, oh shit kind of shows. Like if you were there, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that show. And when you guys finished playing, we were just like, oh, this sucks. And then everybody started just filtering out of the room, and we're like, fuck. We were
Um,
scrambling to get set up really quick just to start. It was a depressing night for us at a depressing time for the band. And after that, we basically broke up for about a year. We didn't even know if we were going to be back together again. Not because of that
oh,
show, but
right,
because that show is just like the shit cherry on top of a crap Sunday at that point.
right, right, right.
Um, and after that, like Nirvana was just that was the point at which the band was completely exploding. I'm thinking Bleach was out by then, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
And I think that's part of why everybody was there for you guys.
yeah,
Because after that, I don't think you opened for many bands at that point, other than, maybe huge bands that were coming through.
yeah, or stuff that was maybe on the road or something like that, depending on what the bill was, I guess. Which I
Yeah.
think we might have. I mean, we did several tours, in the
Mhm.
states, and I'm wondering if we might have actually done the first one already, and then that show happened. Just because,
That would kind of make sense because I remember as a band, you guys seemed really fine tuned and just like because you guys were on fire.
yeah, yeah, it's
The full force and power of what Nirvana was capable of was on full display that night.
well, yeah, it's so strange because trying to figure out, that sort of, evolution of,
Mhm.
where do we sit on the bill? Are we openers? Are we this? Are we that? Are they in the middle or the slot? I honestly I never thought about that stuff at all. I was just excited to play a show, you know.
Really.
And to be honest, most of the time I always felt, you know, most comfortable just opening up because I always thought, well, everybody's gonna just
Then you can
take
drink
it.
afterwards.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, even going into that show, in my mind, it was never thought like, oh, we should be headlining. To me, I was like, no, dude, this is Skin Yard. We got to open for Skin Yard. These guys are badass. I've
Well,
always
well, thank you.
always a good, yeah, I was always a big Skin Yard fan. Always have
We
been.
we
Always
we were not badass that night, that's for sure.
been. Well, I'm willing to bet that I like you. So that night. So Scott, was he the drummer that maybe it was just a one shot picture? Did he used to wear like this weird straw hat or some sort of wide brim hat?
I think he Yeah, I think he did. I
I
think
don't
he
know
did.
why that just pops in my head.
Scott was a fiery drummer, but also a really fiery personality.
Oh, right, right.
He's mellowed a lot since then, I mean, 30, 40 years will do that to a
Yeah,
person,
yeah,
but, it was part of why in the end he was out of the band. It ended up being more of a liability and just kind of from a personal place of tension, it was not good,
right, right, yeah.
and, we kicked him out, and I think he was pretty hurt. Well, I know he was pretty hurt because I've talked to him about it since, but, it happens.
Yeah,
Which actually brings me to your departure from the band, and I think your departure from Nirvana was a lot more of a sort of mutual amicable thing, not unlike how it was when Matt Cameron left Skinyard. He quit, but we were kind of I mean, people think it's weird that we were like, "Yeah, we're kinda done with Matt." And I still think he was, like, at that time, the best drummer in Seattle, and still, to this day, one of the best drummers in Seattle.
I completely agree.
But he was one of those drummers that he was so good and so exacting that he could do anything you could throw at him,
Yeah,
period.
yes.
And that was cool, but it was also kind of a problem for a band like us because like, oh shit, well, let's try this thing, right? And so we would sort of end up exploring the artier, more quirky, more, for lack of a better word, proggy, which I hate that word.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, it wasn't really who we wanted to be as a band. But as long as he was in the band, we were going to keep being this version of ourselves that we didn't necessarily want to be. So we were getting tired of that. He was getting tired, I think. He actually, interestingly enough, pre Soundgarden, he left the band because he wanted to do more jazz, actually. you know? And so we ended up getting Scott. It was well, first we got Jason Finn for like 6 months, and then we got Scott. But Scott was like coming from a much more punk rock place, kind of more of a scratch acid kind of just intensity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That suited us in terms of what we really wanted to do creatively.
Right, yeah.
Technically, he wasn't as, didn't have the prowess of a Matt Cameron, and it kind of didn't matter. It's like, yes, this is, you know, I think we had a certain kind of power at that point that, was, but anyway,
Yeah,
I'm digressing.
I definitely know what you mean when you like Matt, when you talk about like I can get the jazz thing too, and it instantly brings me to Tone Dogs. That had jazz buttered all over that. So
Yeah,
a lot
but
of
it's
ways.
its own version of everything.
Yeah,
I've always thought it was sad that the Tone Dogs record isn't better known and more deeply respected because it's an amazing piece of work, that
it's
record.
fantastic, and I completely agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please make sure you hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's the quickest way to grow our channel, and it's absolutely free. You can also subscribe to our other channels on social media. Check out our Instagram at Creative Asylum CA, that's the letter CA, or on TikTok at The Creative Asylum, that's all one word. Our website is thecapod.com, and our Facebook profile is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. All right, back to the episode. So with Nirvana, like what, you were getting tired of Nirvana, and at the same time they were choosing to get rid of you, so it was sort of this weird mutual
Yeah,
thing?
it was it's pretty mutual thing because for me, like I remember, like when we got through recording Bleach and
Hmm.
touring for a bit, Kurt had often talked about having some more help in songwriting and stuff like that. Every single band I was ever in, I wrote a lot of songs for. You know,
Hmm.
and so that was just sort of in my blood. It's like to me, I'm sort of like a jack of all trades, master of none. That's sort of like who I am. I like being
Yeah.
good at everything. I can play everything and put a song together with every single instrument. But it's like so that anyway, at that point, that's something that I was really passionate about doing that sort of thing. And of course, I just later learned as time went on that just really wasn't going to happen. I mean, there was never a
Uh-huh.
window or opportunity opened up. Like, hey, what do you've got? Have you been writing anything? All that kind of stuff. I mean, I had been, um, but it never came around. But at the same time, I kind of realized maybe it shouldn't have or something, or I don't
Uh-huh.
know because I mean, Kurt was definitely his own writing machine,
Right. Yes.
and he always had stuff coming on, and it was always good. And I thought, well,
Uh-huh.
maybe they're just, maybe there just isn't the time as well to be able to like insert something in there or whatever. So, and I think for me, after a while, it just sort of, if it probably was just a drummer, maybe things would
Right.
be different. But because I have such a passion for also writing as well.
Were you a drummer first, or did you play other instruments before drums?
Well, actually, the very first instrument I ever played was violin.
Okay.
But the short amount of time they had it in fourth grade when I lived in Port Angeles, and I only took it because it was actually offered in school.
Uh-huh.
But I went to school there for maybe about like 5 months. I mean, I moved a ton in my lifetime, more than anyone I've ever known. But
Because why? Military or other reasons?
well, my dad actually was a disc jockey. He was in radio.
Okay.
And well, it started on television when I was really young. I used to sit in my little, dangerous rocky horse thing with the springs that would always break and watch my dad. He was a news anchor man for a station. I want to say it was WLOL in Minnesota. But yeah, I think a lot of it too was, also, going where the money is because, it's a lot different now. I mean, most people you hear on the radio, cut a pretty nice check. Back then, like in the 70s and 60s, 50s back, unless you were like a Wolfman Jack or a Casey Kasem,
Right, right.
you would pull in the bucks, but anything else, it's like you didn't make that much, I mean,
It
and
was a
especially
scrape and a hustle.
yeah, and you made
Yeah.
considerably less than like a lot of other jobs you could have. And so, when you've got, 3 kids to raise and feed and stuff like that, you kinda have to go where the money is, and he would get a lot
Sure.
of offers all the time. And he's kinda one of those guys that's like, if you heard my dad's voice and someone said, "Oh, my dad was on radio," and you heard my voice, you'd be like, "Oh, yeah, he was on radio." He totally had that kind of voice. But
Yeah.
anyway, so we moved a ton for that reason, so, yeah. At one point, my mom actually made a big list of all the, places that we'd lived. It's like 4 or 5 pages, like 73 moves.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Holy cow,
crazy.
that's wild.
It's
So, okay, you started with violin in 4th grade.
So I started violin in 4th grade.
Then where'd you go from there?
And then after that, while I was doing that, so my older sister was learning guitar, and she had this Ovation that was at home. And I would kind of mess around with that guitar a little bit when I was at home. Once when we moved, the violin store, of course, that stopped because we didn't have the money to pay for lessons or let alone rent a violin. So that was the end of that. But the acoustic stuck around, and so I'd play around on that a little bit, and then
Uh-huh.
somewhere in the fold, I took some music classes, in grade school, and then I got interested in drums. That's when the drumming started coming into play. So I kind of really jumped around a couple of different
Right.
things before I landed on drumming. But when I got a drum kit, my first drum kit was in, I think, 81. My parents picked up an old CB 700 for like $200 at a garage sale.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I sat down and I just immediately went, dum, ka, dum, ka, dum, ka. And I was like, oh, weird. And I
Like, you
just
just
did
yeah,
that
like, it
again.
was just right it
Yeah.
was right there.
Yeah. It's like I could do that. And then I looked around for a song or something. And, I put a cassette in and played a song. And I was like, I'm just going to start playing it, play this, I don't know what song it was, but it's this simple beat. And I knew right there, I was like, oh, weird. I can actually do this. It's not like, it just came naturally.
It come natural. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that instantly got me, excited about drumming. I instantly
That's how it
grew
was
on.
that's how it was for me with bass. I wanted to be a guitar player,
Yeah.
and I worked really hard. I spent hours, and I took lessons, and I bought books, and I always just sucked. I still suck to this day. And a friend of mine was in a band, and I'm like, "Oh, do you guys want a second guitar player?" "Yeah, sure." Every guitar player wants a second guitar player, right?
Yeah.
And the bass player was this girl, Diana, and she couldn't play to her way out of a paper bag, and, you know, and she quickly figured that out, and she left. I'm like, "Oh, oh, you have an opening for a bass player. I'll buy a bass." And so I bought a bass, and all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, this feels absolutely natural and made sense." And I realized that for me, an instrument that was inherently melodic was what clicked with my brain as opposed to sort of chordal
Right,
rhythm,
yeah.
which was interesting. And I think it's because of all the music I grew up listening to. So much of it was bass heavy, soul,
Right.
R&B, jazz, a lot of that stuff.
Right, yeah, yeah.
How old were you when you were in your first band as a drummer?
15, 14 or
Okay. Uh-huh.
15. I started this band, with a friend of mine. I was living in Yakima at the time. We had this band idea. I think I'm trying to remember if we were calling ourselves Anubis. And so, yeah, we basically it was me, guitar, and then, we had a keyboard player, synth player.
Uh-huh.
And that was the first time that we actually kind of, started writing songs. I'd written 2 songs for the band and just playing drum stuff. We never played any shows or anything. It was just kinda like, "Well, let's start a band." So we kinda started a band. We did some songs and stuff and
Uh-huh.
made a couple of cheap boombox recordings. But that was yeah, I would have been about 14 or 15 at the time.
That's cool. And was Nirvana the first band you ever recorded and released something?
Actually, the first time I recorded released something would be with Stone Crow. So
Okay.
yeah, so some people might know about Stone Crow, I don't know, but back in like 84, 85, I have this friend, Rob Day, the bass player, and, he'd had this band called Stone Crow for quite a while, which actually Ben Shepherd told me about him. He said, "Oh, there's this guy lives on Bainbridge Island. He's a really cool dude, and he's got this weird band called Stone Crow." When I first heard Stone Crow, this tape, it was just it wasn't what it would become. but it was just like this weird, like, music of, like, I can't even explain it. It was like I don't know, like, funhouse music or something. It's
Okay.
yeah, like, if Pee Wee Herman made a band, what would that sound like? It yeah, and it was
It'd be pretty cool.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing that I thought. It was really cool. It had a lot of cool stuff in it. It kinda played it took a lot of different stuff, like TV notes off of it and music. Anyways, we ended up hooking up and being friends, and he was totally into the metal scene and stuff like that. Like, really into, like Slayer, Sodom,
Uh-huh.
Destruction, especially a lot of the stuff out of Germany, and, they were looking for a band for their speed metal band, or drummer for their speed metal band, and I was like, "Yeah, sure, heck, that sounds fun, let's do that," and so I joined Stone Crow, and, at the time, this guy named Paul was the guitar player, but then, Paul left the band, and we got Jason Everman to play guitar with us.
Okay.
So
He was another Bainbridge guy?
yep. Well,
Okay.
Paulsbo, actually, he's from the Paulsbo area.
Okay.
We recorded our first album, which was just on a cassette. We did it in Rob's, bedroom in a studio, and we did it with a 4 track, and John Goodmanson, recorded,
Okay, yeah.
the tape for us.
I think I was talking to Scotty Crane at one point, and he was mentioning Stone Crow to me in some capacity.
Oh, yeah. Yep, yep, yep.
So, Jason Everman was in
Yeah.
Stone Crow, and if I'm not mistaken, was it Jason Everman that paid for the recording session for Bleach?
Yes. Yep.
How did that happen? Like, I'm just curious. It's such a sort of left field kind of thing.
Yeah, it really is. Jason was, of course, a really big fan and had been talking about the idea of getting another guitar player at some point,
Right.
to play for live shows and stuff like that. It was really just sort of a kind of a sort of a friendship gesture thing. It's like, you know, we didn't have the money.
Okay.
It's like, well, we get the money, and Jason, like, "Oh, I'll cover it. Don't worry, dude.
That's
Mm,
it's pretty rad. Pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah, very, very cool. Very cool.
So did that have anything to do with why he ended up on the cover of Bleach, a record on which he doesn't appear?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so. It's like,
Because I've always thought that was the strangest thing. I mean, I know he ended up in the band for a minute.
yeah.
I mean, I was working at Sub Pop. I mean, I basically sold the first 50,000 copies of Bleach
Oh,
because
wow.
I was the one and only sales guy, and I had built up the entire direct to retail department at Sub Pop and was the guy that interfaced directly with Caroline, our distributor at the time.
Yep, yep.
And I was super behind this record, so I was pushing it every chance I could get. But I just always remember kind of going, "That's odd,"
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Well,
What?
I think that the thing was, it was if for on our part, it was like, okay, I think, he not only did he'll pay for the record, but I think we kinda knew that, like, we were gonna ask him to
Right,
wanna come on, tour with us and all that kind of
right.
he's a guitar
And
player.
so probably you were on tour. The picture was taken. The record hadn't come out yet, and you're still working on the artwork.
Right, right.
I guess that makes some weird sense.
Yeah, I mean, it is so bizarre because I mean, we it's kinda like the chicken or the egg sort of thing in a weird way, 'cause,
Uh
here
huh.
we were recording this record, and of course, between recording and then releasing the record, not a whole lot of time between that, but
Right,
then came, Jason, who pays for the recording,
right,
but then, we're playing shows with him now,
right, right,
after
right.
that session. Then we started playing he was in the band. So he was
Yeah.
now a member of Nirvana, and a quick
Hmm.
click, the picture was
How,
taken.
how long was he in the band for total? Was it a year?
Might have been around that, maybe a skosh less,
Yeah.
because I remember things sort of fell apart when we were on a tour, and I still to this day, still don't really know what, uh, happened
I'll have
too much about that. But anyways,
I'll have to ask him. He has agreed to be on this podcast at some point, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's also very hard to pin down. He's sort of
Yeah,
elusive.
yeah, he is very elusive, he's here to there, but we've, kept in contact forever. Of course, I grew up with him,
Yeah.
I've known him as long as I've known, like, Ben and all those people. We were
I've always really liked Jason. I
yeah,
was always
Jason's
kind of a
great
fan,
guy. Yeah,
you know.
lot of heart for that guy. Ton.
So I have these two photographs taken by Charles Peterson. One is a pretty early picture of Nirvana with you and the band in a field of, I think it's a field of flowers.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen the photo. And it there's a innocence and a brightness and kind of a happiness and a joy. And then the other picture I have is a later picture. You weren't in the band anymore. I think it was toward the end of his life, actually. And it's just him kind of sitting on the edge of a bed, wearing like pajama top, and the whole thing just feels like dark. It feels and looks like heavy duty depression. And those
yeah,
two photos next to each other, just like it's like light and dark. It's always saddened me to have watched that whole emotional decline and sort of as I've always perceived it, that Kurt was just not built for that kind of scrutiny and attention, and because he was kind of a quiet, shy guy,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so I want to ask you about life after Nirvana and just sort of looking back at it now as a different entity. Because you were kind of there for the time when things were a lot more uplifting and happy as things were building before it completely exploded.
Right.
But in a weird way, you kind of got to experience the best of it.
Well, it's funny you mention that because, when I, went to, Kurt's wake, which I
Uh-huh.
think was at, so I recall it was at Chris's place. We were chatting, and he looked at me and said, it's like you were really there for, like, the best part of Nirvana."
Right.
And he said, and, it was, it was hard, and I think you were lucky to not have been a part of that.
I imagine it was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and it was sort of a split emotion thing,
Uh,
at one point, I was like, "Yeah, it's kinda cool, I'm glad that, that I got to experience the lighter side, of the happier side of Kurt and
uh,
the band," and at the same time, it made me sad thinking where it ended up, it sucks
yeah,
that
it
he
does.
didn't continue having joy with with his life and, to what he was doing. And so that was always kind of a, push me, pull you. But I mean, I have a lot of fond memories for sure of,
Uh-huh.
of the old days and stuff. I mean, I've often heard like, if you get like on a major label and all of a sudden it's like, a lot of your time isn't your time anymore. They really put you on schedule and on tour and all and everything that we were doing. I mean, there was a sense of freedom, which I think, a lot of bands and musicians, always strive not to lose. We don't want to
Yeah,
lose our ability to make our own musical choices and so on and so forth or whatever. But being able there was a definite sort of carefree sort of thing, even though I mean we had obviously had to, scheduled to keep, trying to make enough money to get
sure,
to the next
sure.
show, all that sort of stuff. But
But it's kind of the devil's bargain, I think, of going to a major.
yeah,
Unless you have enough leverage to say, "You're gonna give us creative freedom or the freedom to do things."
yeah,
I think bands that go to majors, but say, "No, we're not gonna take $1,000,000. We're not gonna take $500,000 to record." I always felt like bands like Flaming Lips and Mudhoney were smart because they said, "We're gonna take less money, but in exchange, you're kinda not gonna fuck with how we run our band because we know us better than you do," you know?
right, yep.
And then they have longevity, and they have careers and, can still make money and still make a living.
Exactly, and another big part of that too, when you talk about that, is also very important is how many albums you sign on for. I mean, it's like if you're smart, let's just do one record, see how that goes, sort of deal. I mean,
Well, a major will never do that though,
yeah,
right?
exactly. But if you can sort of get like maybe two or three, it's just like if you pin yourself down to like so many records, then you're stuck for
Well, I think the issue is invariably like your lawyers and the managers because they all work on commission. So they wanna get as much money as possible so that they get the biggest payday,
yeah,
and instead they should be looking out for their actual band, their actual client, and say, "I'm gonna basically bank on the long-term relationship. Maybe I don't buy a house after, from
yeah,
from the advance off the first record, but instead, I work with you over the course of 15 or 20 years, and it's fruitful and everybody wins."
right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're starting to run down on time, and I do, I do wanna talk about your post-Nirvana creativity, which is decades, and, and your current project as well, Can of Clouds. I was a fan of Fire Ants when that first came out,
Oh, yeah, yeah, the Wood Brothers.
but it was pretty short-lived, and I'm just wondering why. Like, you just had one full length, right? Like a single and a full length or something like
Yep,
that?
yep, we put 1 single out, and then yeah, and then 1 full length, and that was it.
Was there volatility or what?
Well, the issue really was with Brian Wood. Interesting character, really talented,
Yes,
I think a great singer,
I remember.
but he always performed his best when it never mattered.
Uh-huh,
We had a show, one time where, there was a guy from, I think it was A&M that was coming up to check us out.
uh-huh,
We got to the show, set up to play and everything. Brian was there, but he refused to get on stage. I think he was, like,
okay.
on meth or something like that, and he was watching us. And that just that he watched us play the I think we might even invited people up from, in the audience to come up and sing because it's just like,
Right.
I mean,
So
that's what
sort of a self-saboteur.
yeah, yeah, so which is really a shame, and that just ended up kinda, just ended up killing the band, but it was a shame because, I mean, he was really talented, so I
He
don't
was,
yeah,
but he was erratic,
yeah,
as I
so
as I recall. Was he still doing that thing where he's bringing his dog on stage?
oh, yeah, Tiger, yep, he'd bring Tiger on stage, yep.
I used to kinda love that, like, "Oh, he brings his dog everywhere, including on stage at a show."
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I
so
felt bad for the dog's hearing because. Anyway, and then fast forward quite a few years, what about, how did Before Cars come together,
so
and
before Cars started,
and
I
what was
did it
that arc? Because that
so
lasted a couple records, right?
yeah, yeah, so I have a couple records. The first one was Walk Back, and the second one was, How We Run. Uh, they're both very different records. If I had to recommend one the most, it would probably be How We Run. My major influences for me
Mhm.
was always like I grew up like anything that was top 100 Billboard during the '70s, I probably heard 'em 3 times over. Being my dad being a disc jockey,
Right.
I really got into the whole singer-songwriter stuff. I mean, I was huge into like, I was huge into Jim Croce,
Mhm.
Carole King.
Were you ever a Harry Nilsson fan?
Yes.
I'm a huge Nelson fan, that's
Yeah.
why I asked.
Nelson Schmelson, man. Good stuff.
Yeah,
Love it.
and Son of Schmilsson too, I gotta say.
Yes.
People poo-poo that record, but I think it's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway.
So that started because I finally wanted to like do something that was a lot of my influences. So I wrote all the songs, played most a lot of the instruments on the record.
Uh-huh.
And of course did all the singing. It's a perfect representation of, what I feel like inside when it was my opportunity, I guess, to really dig from what really influenced me. And then from Before Cars, that's what I was doing nothing for quite a while. I mean, I was actually in this band called Pawnee for a long time, which Pawnee still exists. Really cool band, like 4 or 5 records. But, I've always had an interest in doing, electronic stuff. When I first heard bands like Tycho, Boards of Canada, stuff
Oh,
like
yeah.
that,
Yep,
like,
yep,
this is
mhm.
interesting. It's like it's not full on EDM type of stuff. They're just mixing electronic music with, acoustic stuff.
Right.
And I thought it'd be fun to do that sort of thing, and maybe as a duo.
That's what Can of Clouds
And that's
is.
what Can of Clouds is. That's I talk
And Justine was with Before Cars and is now the other half of Can of Clouds with
Yeah,
you,
and she
right,
also played
currently?
in Pawnee as well. Yes, so she's my partner in crime, and it's interesting because from my background, from singer-songwriter to like, the whole punk rock thing and all that, she is, classically trained. I mean, she's got her degree from PLU and all that kind of stuff, and
Right.
and so it's an interesting, mix to put those 2 together. But, we're really enjoying what we're doing, and, fact, this weekend, we're going in the studio to, record some stuff. We're getting some free time, actually.
Oh,
This
that's
guy
great.
yeah, this guy said, "Oh, my daughter's going to, Seattle Arts Institute. She's studying, engineering, auto engineering, and was wondering if you wanna help her out, with her
Oh, very
goal."
cool.
So, I was like, "Oh, I'll take advantage of, some free recording stuff."
So it's gonna be a couple songs, not a full record.
Yeah, just a couple songs and also kind of give an idea of how I want to where we want to record the next record. I mean, the first record
Okay.
I recorded right here in my studio.
Okay.
And so
Very
but I
cool.
always want to do something different for each record. So I'll
Okay.
give you an idea of what I want to do there.
Let me ask you a final question because I'm suddenly realizing that we are almost at the end of our
Oh,
session.
yes. Okay.
what drives you in your creative journey as you continue? You've never really stopped, and it seems you're probably never going to stop. And I hope you never stop.
Yeah, yeah. I hope not to either. I don't know. I think that passion for music has just never died, and I think for having so many influences. It's funny, I've always said to people, my record collection is it's all over the place. I always said to people, "I'm guaranteed to have something you probably will absolutely hate, but I'll probably have something you'll absolutely love at the same time."
Right.
Anything from industrial music to Bach to the Kennedys to Elvis Costello to who knows?
Right.
Um, but I think it's all that different influences. I always have my ear to the ground for, try to hear something I haven't heard before, new music, and little bits and pieces every now and then will inspire me. I'll hear something I haven't heard before. Oh, that's actually really cool. And that might, inspire me to do something different in my music, and I think just overall life in general, it's been a roller coaster that I live and with its ups and downs. And I always take that. And as long as I have that, as long as I'm still living and breathing and living this life, I'm going to turn those emotions it gives me into music. So it's always going to be my permanent outlet for what I do.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Creative Asylum. A quick favor before you go. If you liked this conversation, please be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday at 10. You can find us on Instagram and on YouTube at Creative Asylum CA. That's Creative Asylum and the letters CA. Our website is thecapod.com. And our Facebook is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. Until next week, when we'll have a new conversation with another creative disruptor, stay creative in life and at work.